cruising for a national bruising. Okay? So, note here, because there has been confusion, okay? Thing, do. See? That thing. Do. Next time. Okay? It's always, it was. It was. You want me to have to show it? See, my turn. See? Put stars in everything. Let's do next time. Okay. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So,
my textbook is completely missing page 442.
What a coincidence.
441 and 443.
you go to the textbook room and you go show them
Okay, but
that
it's
there's
just like
something.
not.
Go to the textbook room and show them that there's a flaw in the book. Got it? Okay. All right. So I think we were fast and we did this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So but it was kind of as we're going out the door. So I want to remind everybody that as we left last time, this guy by the name of James Buchanan, okay, from Pennsylvania, is elected president, and basically, some of the reasons for that is A, the Democratic Party was the only true national party in 1856 because the Whigs had died, right? So the other parties that were working to try and achieve the presidency were upstart parties. One of them was the Republican Party, and the other was the American or the Know Nothing Party. And you could very much argue that both of these parties were issues parties. The Republicans were an anti-slavery party, whereas the American Know Nothing Party was an anti-immigrant party. And so so it was they were using these big issues to try and gain support and perhaps become the new second party after the death of the Whigs. Now, if you look at the map, obviously, who is solidly with the Democrats here? The South, okay? And it's kind of weird, right? It's like the further you are away from the South, the more likely you were to vote Republican. Yeah.
Weird.
Why did Californians vote Democratic if they were a free state?
Well, several free states voted, because remember, the Republicans are still only an upstart party at this point. And and the Democratic Party was really the only national party. So you would have had to have been thinking really hard to not vote Democratic in this. Possibly, because it was a national party. And if you had been a Whig, you're going, what do I do? Okay, and you didn't know if you wanted to be Republican. You didn't know if you wanted to be Republican because of the of being anti-slavery. You're not sure if you're quite ready to make that commitment yet. Okay, and then obviously this other thing of being anti-immigrant that was, is that something you really want to do? And so therefore you go back to what's the only national party, something you know, something's been around.
California?
The Democrats. In California? Okay. Now, even before James Buchanan took office, okay, so this is this case was sitting in the hands of the United States Supreme Court just as James Buchanan was about to be inaugurated president. And they actually announced the results of it after he had been inaugurated, but we now know that the Supreme Court had actually leaked its decision to James Buchanan. And there are, and if you look at his inauguration speech, there are some things in it that you now go, oh, that's how he knew. He kind of had a sneak peek at this decision. Okay. Basically, what the United States Supreme Court is going to try and do is put the issue of slavery to bed. The court is going to try and basically say that we are the national law of the land, and our decision, okay, everybody should accept, and then guess what? We can all just move on. Okay, so the court sometimes tries to just say, you know, we've got a divisive issue. Let's say this is how it is. So everybody stop arguing. And so this is what the court was attempting to do in this case. They thought that they were the ultimate answer. And therefore, if they say X, it's going to be that. All right? This was their hope. Anyway, the case was about a Missouri slave and actually his wife, okay? A guy by the name of Dred Scott. And Dred Scott had been the slave property of an army doctor. Well, what this did is it created an unusual circumstance. And what the unusual circumstance is that here he was slave property, but this army doctor was assigned to a station in the Free Illinois Territory when it was just a territory before it was a state, and the Free Wisconsin Territory when it was just a territory before it was a state. And he was held there as a slave. And what's interesting about these two places is that the reason why they were free was because of a federal law. Okay? The first was the Northwest Ordinance, which declared all of the Northwest Territory, the old Northwest Territory, that was going to be forever free. The United States Congress, when it went into session, one of its first things was basically to bless many of the decisions of the old Confederate Congress. And so this was still on the books as a federal law. Secondly, the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise had drawn that line, saying that everything north of 3630 had been free. Okay? Wisconsin at that time, which in which Dred Scott had been taken there as a slave, it was still a territory under this law. Okay? And so basically what Dred Scott's arguing is that since he was brought into these free territories, he should ought to be free. Okay? It's actually, in a weird way, a very simple idea. How could he have been kept enslaved in a territory that federal law said he shouldn't have? Okay, so does everyone get the basics here? Okay, and Jackie,
Yeah, is Tawny Chief Justice?
Tawny is still the Chief Justice, so he is Andy Jackson's appointee. Is the Chief Justice here? Okay. Anyway, the court will rule 7-2 against Dred Scott. The court will rule 7-2. Yes. Okay. It was a court which was basically on balance mainly Southerners, okay, or Jackson-influenced Democrats, okay, who believed in the Jackson deal, okay, the Jackson deal, or the Van Buren deal. Question?
So it was necessarily against Dred Scott or in favor of his honor?
Yeah, I would, since he was doing the suing, okay, and his case was actually initially upheld, a lower court actually said that it had ruled with Dred Scott. Okay,
So why did
and it
it
went to, because then it got pushed to the, it was appealed to the next level, but not by Dred Scott, if that makes sense.
Stanford appealed the-
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
How does, I feel like the court system got itself into like a cycle here, because how does a piece of I hate to refer to Dred Scott as property, but how does property sue?
Well, that's
someone?
exactly,
That's the argument that
that's exactly how they decided it. Tawney, who is the Chief Justice, also wrote the decision. Okay, and basically said that Scott could not sue. Initially, it was an abolitionist who basically picked up the case on Scott's basically behalf, and that was not uncommon. When Sojourner Truth sued for the freedom of her son when her slave owner sold her son down to the South. An abolitionist came forward and kind of co-sponsored her so that she could sue. And so the same thing happened with the Scots. And so it wasn't an uncommon thing. It happened in courts a lot. And in fact, the lower court had even sided with the Scots. But the Supreme Court is going to basically change that way of doing things dramatically with this decision by saying that that Scott, as a citizen, was not a citizen and did not have the right to sue. Now, here's the thing. He could have stopped there. He could have just said, Scott does not have the right to sue, end of story. But Tawney wanted to tell more of the story, okay? So in other words, he could have just, boom, done. But he decides to go more. And what he also includes in his decision is the idea that Congress did not have the right to regulate slavery. That Congress did not have the right to ban slavery in the territories because of the Fifth Amendment. So he's basically now enshrining in Supreme Court precedent John C. Calhoun's argument. It's now no longer just John C. Calhoun saying, I think. It's now the United States Supreme Court saying, John C. Calhoun, you were right. This is how it is. And then by effect, what this does is it declares the now defunct, because it was repealed, but it says that any last vestige of the old Missouri Compromise and the Northwest Ordinance, they are unconstitutional because the Congress was attempting to regulate something they did not have the right to regulate. The Supreme Court basically saying, and there it is, we're done on the matter, we don't have to argue about slavery anymore, we have spoken. Yeah.
What I'm a little confused about is that, so if you bring slaves into a free territory, since you're not able to have slaves in that territory, would they?
So
Doesn't that give-
territory now
Yeah.
Does not matter because there's no such thing as a free territory because the federal government can't say that it's free.
Before that, but
Right.
like saying, so Scott sued on the grounds
Mhm.
of just his
Right.
his freedom, or also
That he should have been free when he was brought into the free territory. Most states, so this goes a little bit more complicated, but most states at the time actually had almost a property waiver system. Like Pennsylvania said that if you were just passing through with slave property, slave property could remain slave property. But if you remained in the States 5 weeks, then any people still after 5 weeks would be free. There were actually southern plantation owners who had land up in Pennsylvania, and they would literally rotate slaves, okay, every 5 weeks to make it so that they would basically practice slavery in the state of Pennsylvania because of the way so obviously it's when you get down to the real regulations and everything like that, it gets complicated, and we're talking the big picture here. But it became a very complicated system of property rights. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Any other questions on this? Does it? Can everyone see how this is huge?
Yeah.
Okay. There are very few Supreme Court cases that are as huge as the Dred Scott case. As time has said, this is one of the ones that the court got wrong. Okay,
Yeah.
but did that mean that? But at the time, it's huge. Does that make sense?
This is a step forward and 2 steps back.
So, a last thing, and this is really just more of a transitional thing, but it's a little piece of information that I want you to have in your brain for evidence when we go back to that idea of popular sovereignty. What happens in Kansas is that the government that got itself elected in Kansas was a pro-slavery government. Okay? Remember, they got themselves elected by fraud, but they are still the government. Does that make sense? And so to sanctify their place as the government of Kansas, they write a state constitution. They wrote the Constitution in Lecompton, and it's kind of dumb.
Yeah.
We call it the Lecompton Constitution because of that, straight out of Lecompton. Okay, so oftentimes historians just throw a term at you, the Lecompton Constitution, and you're supposed to know. Oh, I know what that means. Okay, if you ever got yourself stuck talking to a Civil War historian, they might just throw at you, and of course the Lecompton Constitution. And so you basically now just nod and go, oh yeah, okay, I know what that is. Right? So basically what happens is the pro-slavery legislature of Kansas writes a constitution. They then set it out to the public to vote on. Now here's the thing. They know that the majority of people in Kansas are anti-slavery. And so therefore, if they have out there this pro-slavery constitution, what's the likely result as far as ratification is concerned?
slavery from the outlaw.
Well, is it likely to pass? No. Okay. So they decided to basically go all hinky with how they did the ratification process. What they basically did is they set up the question on the ballot so that basically Kansas would remain a slave territory whether you accepted the Constitution or you didn't accept the Constitution. you basically think of it this way. Everybody imagine a ballot right in front of you. And it says, I accept the Lecompton Constitution in the slave state of Kansas, or I reject the Lecompton Constitution in the slave state of Kansas. And so in other words, either way, what were you basically affirming? It was a slave state. And so just imagine you're looking at this and you're going, but where's the spot where I say not a slave state? Where do I get to say no? Where do I get to say this isn't right? And it wasn't there. They basically set up the ballot as we're going to win or we're going to win better. Okay? And so basically what happens is the anti-slavery forces just decide to say, we're not playing. We refuse to vote in your little old election. Can you see why? I mean, if you were faced with this thing of I'm in favor of slavery or I'm in favor of slavery like forever, where do you vote? You say, I don't want to vote. And so the anti-slavery forces boycotted the election. But here's the awkward thing. If the anti-slavery forces boycott, it passes. If the anti-slavery forces boycott, which they did, it passes. Because the only people voting were pro-slavery.
Wow.
So do you see what just happened there? Okay? And so the pro-slavery forces are going, we win! Okay? Yes?
How could the bill even be, why didn't anybody stop?
Because basically it was a pro-slavery legislature because of the fraud. And so it's like a giant conspiracy. Everybody in the room was going, hey, what can we do? Yeah, let's do it this way. And there wasn't enough votes in the legislature that were opposed to it to stop it. Does that make sense? Because that legislature had been elected because of the fraud.
Right.
Do you follow me here?
That was last class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah.
How would you classify this? Is this also fraudulent, or is this, how do you classify this awfulness?
Well, that's a good question. So let's see how the politicians react here. Okay? So President Buchanan says, woohoo! I guess we get to admit Kansas as a slave state.
Yeah.
Okay? So Buchanan is basically going, hey, all right, they had their vote, it won, and so what now? So now what has he done? Who is he now? What has Buchanan now done? He has now joined. He has publicly supported slavery, and he has basically upheld what we all know to be a sham. Right?
He's probably anti-democracy.
Well, possibly. Okay. Stephen Douglas tells Congress to vote no. Even though he's the one who kind of caused the thing, his argument is, did popular sovereignty actually take place in Kansas? No. And so he basically tries to argue, hey, they didn't do it right. And since they didn't do it right, Congress vote no. And they will block Kansas from becoming a state. But it also divides the Democratic Party. On one hand, on the Democratic Party, you have President Buchanan saying, looks like it's a constitution to me. South, you're with me, right? Okay. Hey, people who want to keep the party together and in power, you're with me, right? And then on the other side, there are Democrats who are going, you know, we were kind of with you before, but this is cheating. We won't play anymore. But sometimes even, sometimes when it's that public, and they have to basically say yay or nay, they sometimes find their conscience. Okay? And basically, because really here, Stephen Douglas did. Stephen Douglas went along with it. Do you think as many people would have walked away? No, but the fact that Stephen Douglas went, wait, what? God, guys! It gave other people courage.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, ladies and gentlemen, okay, where is he?
We have a guy.
Abraham Lincoln. Okay. So, Abraham Lincoln, we have met him. I kind of introduced him back when we talked about the Mexican War and how he had been a war protester trying to get President Polk to show us what spot of American soil American blood had been spilled. He had been given that derisive nickname, Spotty Lincoln, and because of it, he lost his seat in Congress.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, he didn't take it well. He abandoned politics. He actually became a fairly successful frontier lawyer. Okay? He was very well known for his opinions, his ability to articulate difficult concepts in a very clear manner. But when they went off and passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, he came back. He was one of those weird people who thought that when you say forever, forever means forever. He didn't believe that forever should only mean 34 years. And so this thing where he had basically believed that this area would be close to slavery, and now it's not because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act and popular sovereignty. And it's here we start to see Abraham Lincoln. He is anti-slavery, okay? His position, however, evolves, okay, from just simply being against the extension to eventual abolition to eventual equity of rights. That is not who he is yet. Okay? At this point, he is, slavery is wrong, it should not be extended. That's who he is in 1854. Yes?
So, do we say that like he just didn't voice all the other stuff until now? He just said that.
No, we actually have it in writing that his with his views, but most of them weren't as definitive. You could see that he was an evolving person, and in fact, maybe that's perhaps one of his best qualities. He had that ability. He wasn't set forth in things completely forever and ever, if that makes sense. Anyway, in 1855, he ran for Senate in Illinois. And this is not his famous run. This is a less famous attempt at becoming the senator. But to me, it's where we can truly see his character. Okay? In the Illinois State House, you needed some 60 votes in order to be elected senator. It was before the people directly elected senators. It was done in the legislature then. And Lincoln had cobbled together a kind of coalition of Whigs, and they were just starting to call themselves Republicans, of about 55. There were, however, 5 members of this State House, which were anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act Democrats. And what Lincoln was hoping was that based on the Kansas-Nebraska Act, he could lure those 5 Democrats over to him, and he could become senator. And what ended up happening is that there were several different rounds of voting, and the best Lincoln could ever get was 55 votes. Meanwhile, a pro-Kansas-Nebraska Act Democrat was gaining. And the difference was those 5 votes. Finally, just to make sure that those Democrats didn't go voting for their party, as opposed to the fact that they were against the Kansas-Nebraska Act, Lincoln tells all of his 55 supporters to support the one anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act Democrat in the race. So in other words, this guy his name was Lyman Trumbull, and the 5 anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act Democrats were voting for him. 55 Republicans and Whigs were voting for Lincoln. Those 5 Democrats were leaning possibly toward voting with their party and electing a pro-Kansas-Nebraska Act senator. And so what Lincoln did is he told his 55 to vote for the one with 5, so that you got an anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act person in. It was this moment where people were saying, no, you don't do that. 55 does not give to the 5. 5 gives to the 55. But Lincoln did not think it was going to happen. And when asked later, he said it was more important to him that it be an anti-Kansas-Nebraska Act person in the Senate than it be him. Did you get this? Okay. His wife didn't take it as well. She refused to speak to Lyman Trumbull's wife for the rest of her life. But Lincoln went to his victory party. He shook his hand. And later, when Lincoln runs for president, guess who's one of his top supporters? Lyman Trumbull. Got it? In 1858, we have the famous run for Senate. And instead of just letting this one go to the State House and have the vote there, what Lincoln tried to do was get more Republicans elected to the state Senate, okay? So that they would then in turn choose him for senator. Problem, he was going against a living legend. He was going against the current senator from Illinois, Stephen Douglas. Okay? Now Douglas, however, is wounded. He's wounded because he had taken on the President of the United States regarding the Lecompton Constitution. And so what he was looking for was an opportunity to show that he was still got this powerful voice for the Democratic Party and possibly a contender for the presidency. So, when Lincoln challenges him to a series of debates throughout Illinois, Douglas sees it as an opportunity to show off, to beat up on this bumpkin lawyer. Okay? Anyway, Lincoln basically is going to argue points like the fact that the Dred Scott case might prevent states from banning slavery at all. That if there's this thing for the Fifth Amendment in territory for federal government, mightn't it also be applied to a state? Mightn't slavery have become nationalized because of Dred Scott? Secondly, he argued that if we are allowing this to go this way, it basically could rob America of its liberty. Stephen Douglas argued that if we continue to argue over slavery, if we allow it to be an obstacle, America could forfeit its destiny. That if we continue to allow ourselves to be divided, we may not become all that. Sean.
So the Supreme Court made the Northwest Ordinance and Missouri Compromise go away. So
Yeah.
did those states and territories, what happened with it? Which ones-
They were now states, so since they were no longer governed by federal law, it was up to them. But what Lincoln's arguing is another case could come up where it might make it so that that even state law could basically be overturned because of this protection of property. And he's saying we can't accept this. Got to do something about it. Does that make sense? Anyway, what was regarded to be one of the pivotal moments in these debates happened at a town known as Freeport, Illinois. Where basically what Abraham Lincoln did is he forced Douglas to basically say exactly what he believed. Now remember, what had been the argument of Stephen Douglas all along? What was the solution? What was the thing that would fix everything? Popular sovereignty. He was Mr. Popular Sovereignty. And so basically what Lincoln does at Freeport is say, well, which one do you think is more important as far as federal law? Is it popular sovereignty or is it the Dred Scott decision? If you had to choose between the two, which outweighs what? He had to go with popular sovereignty because that is what he's been saying all along. If he had chosen Dred Scott, he basically would have looked hypocritical. However, by choosing popular sovereignty over Dred Scott, who's mad? Which Democrats? The South. Which one would the South prefer? Dred Scott, because Dred Scott basically said, you can't do anything. It's a thing. Yes?
Did Douglas ever, publicly align himself with the institution of slavery? Because by popular sovereignty, he's sort of taking neutral ground.
And revisionist historians like to try and argue that he really truly was thinking that he could solve the slavery issue via this idea of popular sovereignty. The problem is that the very fact that he did the Kansas-Nebraska Act and he asked for the repeal of the 3630 line of the Missouri Compromise kind of puts him on the other team.
So then when Lincoln forces him to choose between popular sovereignty and Dred Scott, he's sort of like saying, he's sort of going from his southern like pro-slavery into neutral ground, saying that like
he would prefer to be just known as neutral.
Yeah.
And would argue that he never truly advocated slavery.
But his actions say otherwise.
Yes.
And that's why the South is so mad now that he's actually.
Because now he has a shot at
he was
it.
called out.
He has a shot at basically saying, "Hey South, I love you."
Yeah.
All he had to do, all he had to do was say, "Hello South, Dred Scott," and they would say, "Bravo, bravo, welcome to the Doughface Club."
Yeah.
Right? But he didn't.
But he like it can be argued that he's like a human, he's moral.
Well, again, just like his stand at on Lee Compton, it was a courageous stand.
Yeah.
Okay? But as far as presidential politics, as a Democrat, does it help him or hurt him? It hurts him.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Anyway. Douglas will go on to defeat Lincoln. It basically was because of local races and the way that the Democrats had already set up how districts were shaped. They remain in control of the state legislature, and since they remained in control of the state legislature, they choose Douglas. But Lincoln has now gained a national reputation, okay? If you were looking for somebody who was a prominent voice on this issue, it's Abraham Lincoln. Meanwhile, in 1858, that party which had been a nowhere party, okay, in 1854, had basically become the second party in 1856. In 1858, the Republicans take control of the House of Representatives. So you now have a Republican-controlled House. And so now in 1858, is there any argument? What is the second party? What is the other party in the two-party system? It's truly the Republicans. And that party system has lasted to this day. The philosophies has changed, but the parties remain. All right. This is one of my favorite little slides. One of my students just sent me a postcard 2 years ago saying that they visited Knox College, and they on the postcard, did you know that, Mr. King, that they had one of the Lincoln-Douglas debates at Knox College? And I went, yes. Yes, I did. All right. So sum it up for me. If you're gonna tell me 3 things about Abraham Lincoln right now, what would they be? 3 things. What would sticks? I didn't even say that. Lyman Trumbull. Okay, so finish that last point. And why don't you get up, walk over to your Big Ben, and see if you can agree on one thing.
Big Ben?
Okay, get up and walk over. See if you can come up with one thing between the two of you. Lyman Trumbull. Lyman Trumbull was the anti-Nebraska Well, he said that you say when you take him as opposed to somebody who's
Yeah.
He didn't have to vote. So you have, I have 55, you have 5. Okay. But you're a Democrat.
He was anti-slavery.
The Democrat.
Like, don't move in there, like, keep it in here. Right, like, he was very yes. He was like very, like, he wasn't slavery, like, this is what it should be, I would like this
Okay, going back to your seat. Okay, let's see if we can get 5 Lincoln ideas. Let's see if so all you have to do is say one thing about Abraham Lincoln. So here's a day for you don't talk much. Just shout out one thing about Abraham Lincoln. Okay, Sean, one thing about Abraham Lincoln.
He didn't really care about winning as much as he cared about like the things he believed in winning.
Excellent. Okay. Another thing. That's it? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that if we continue. Okay, that's 2. Let's see if we can get, right? Yeah.
I didn't hear the last thing I said. He was open-minded and constantly evolving, and also he was good at dictating his arguments and making things explicit that were often abstract concepts.
Excellent. Okay, and you didn't hit the one before? Okay, so could you repeat? Excellent. Okay, so let's see. Yes.
He was motivated by the Kansas, Nebraska.
Absolutely he was. Okay, come on. Yeah, 5. He lost the Senate twice. Okay. So everybody, do you know who his hero was? Henry Clay. Okay.
He's a
So,
loser.
all right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, may I reintroduce to you John Brown. Okay. Now, John Brown met. Sir, thank you, sir.
Welcome, sir.
John Brown met with a group of abolitionists known as the Secret Six. Okay, all right. And what they will help plot.
Wait, who met with the Secret Service?
John Brown.
The guy who chopped pieces up.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the guy who chopped people up.
Okay.
Yes, this chop people up guy. All right. So John Brown conspired. John Brown conspired with a group of abolitionists who helped pay and fund an attack on the American Federal Arsenal on Harper's Ferry. What's an arsenal? Yeah, it's an armory. It's where you keep the weapons. So what basically John Brown's goal was is that he would use these weapons or hand out these weapons, okay, for a slave rebellion. So he already had wagon loads full of pikes and pitchforks. He was going to add to it the weapons from Harper's Ferry. And basically the goal was there would be this massive slave uprising. But what if you threw a slave rebellion and nobody came?
It'd be so sad.
Okay. Somebody apparently forgot to tell the slaves. Okay.
Who's gonna eat all these people?
All right. It basically fails. Now, by the way, some historians believe that John Brown was failing on purpose. Okay. No, here's the thing, is that he had control over Harper's Ferry. He had the weapons, and there was a railroad train sitting at the station at Harper's Ferry, which he had basically prevented from moving forward. When suddenly he tells his guys to let the train go. Now, obviously, what does the train do? It goes to the next station and it cables, okay, the United States Army. And who now shows up? Not the slaves for rebellion, but Robert E. Lee and the United States Marine Corps. And they crush.
Yeah, doesn't he die at the...
He doesn't die there. Doesn't die there.
Oh.
Okay?
Yet.
He's captured. Okay? And he's put on trial. Okay? But what now ends up happening is instead of having a massive slave rebellion, he transforms himself into a martyr. Yeah. Okay. Basically, Henry David Thoreau said that he was a saint awaiting his martyrdom.
He was essentially it.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Seriously though,
But-
you chopped up 6 people?
And he just like
But-
captured a federal arsenal.
But in what cause?
And he still is
Okay. But
slave owners.
but you're right. I mean,
In
this.
his eyes it was right, and in my eyes right now it was right, but the people who during that time, they're like, this guy's crazy.
Absolutely. Except northern church bells are going to be ringing out dirges in his honor. A song is written. Listen. Yeah?
John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on.
What does that become?
It becomes the anthem.
It becomes one of the anthems of the Civil War. It becomes known later as the Battle Hymn of the Republic. But originally, it was an anthem to John Brown as a martyr for the abolitionist cause. Okay? Yeah, you got it. Basically, most moderate Republicans deplored his action. And so therefore, a lot of people believe that had he been successful, it would have been a failure. Because what would have been sentiments of people across America if he had caused a massive slave rebellion? What would have been the sentiment?
They would have been disgusted by it in the abolitionist movement.
And instead, what ends up happening, rather than creating this thing that people would be disgusted by, he instead became somebody who died for his cause. Yeah?
Do you think he knew that he was gonna die and then this?
You don't know for sure. But the question then always remains is, why did he let the train go? He didn't have to let that train go, and he let it go. And so when the second he let that train go, he was killing himself.
He knew it.
Did they get the arms from the arsenal?
Well, once they had it, they had control of it all until Robert E. Lee showed up with the Marine Corps.
Did they have like if he hadn't sent the train?
They could have gone off with guns.
Wow.
Okay? The South, however, are now convinced that basically everybody up north is like John Brown. They are convinced that there's a bunch of crazy people who want them to die, okay, are living up in the north. And so now, this is 1859, ladies and gentlemen, 1860.
So
Yeah.
is John Brown, is this John Brown thing like the axe that finally splits the North and the South?
We are putting it in this list for a reason, aren't we?
Yeah. So that's like the main, not the main,
A.
one of the main catalysts.
So, in 1860, the only national party is the Democratic Party. The Republicans, even though they've become a second party, guess what?
They're not running anymore?
In the South, they don't exist. Okay? The North is a big party, but it's only a northern big party. There are not Southern Republicans. Okay? Well, in 1860, the last national party, the Democratic Party, will split. Stephen Douglas had enough votes at the convention because northern states had more votes to get the nomination. But his stand on the Kansas-Nebraska Act, or what happened in Kansas, meaning the whether or not Kansas should come in as a slave state or not, and what he did at Freeport, where he said the popular sovereignty outweighed Dred Scott, made it so that Southerners said, you cannot be our candidate. And when he gets the nomination, Southerners walk out. They hold a convention of their own, and they nominate Vice President John C. Breckinridge as the candidate for the Democratic Party. And so now you have one party, two candidates.
Yeah, is it like split between Northern Democrats?
It was the Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas. Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge. Okay? When this party splits, a lot of people go, oh my God, this is bad. We need somebody who's in favor of keeping the Union together. And so a new party is born. It was known as the Constitutional Unionist Party. What do they believe in? Constitution. What else do they believe in? Union. What's their stand on slavery? Have I mentioned that we believe in the Constitution? Constitution and the Union. But what about the issue of don't talk about anything but Constitution or Union. That's it. That's the only thing. Nothing else but Constitution, Union. Okay? Don't bring up the S word. Okay?
So does it say 2 parties or 3?
Okay.
Democrats are split.
You pick it. Okay? The Republicans had a convention. But the convention was in Chicago, Illinois. Okay. Now, going into this convention, the odds-on favorite was that guy we talked about before, William Seward. William Seward was the most famous anti-slavery politician in America. He had been around since 1850, saying that something ought to be done, and he basically was sitting at his home in New York, waiting for the telegram. In his home city, they had banners all rolled up, okay, ready to unfurl. They had 2 cannon rolled into the town square, ready to be fired off, okay? But Abraham Lincoln had friends. The first friend was one of the Republicans that had been in the state Senate and had seen what he had done, okay, to make Lyman Trumbull the senator. This guy was now the head of the Republican National Committee, and what he did is he scheduled the convention in Chicago to give Lincoln home field advantage. Other Lincoln men went around the streets of Chicago, and they basically handed out tickets to the convention to people, locals, who basically, all you had to do was say the word Lincoln, and they would say, okay.
Lincoln.
The convention was basically divided 3 ways. It was a lot like what happened with James K. Polk. You had Seward, who everybody thought was going to get elected. But right behind him was a senator from Ohio by the name of, his parents apparently didn't love him, Salmon Chase. And a guy from Missouri by the name of Edward Bates. Okay? Basically, each of these people had a plan. Okay? But in all of these camps, Lincoln was very highly regarded as somebody who basically had never said anything against really anybody else. What happened at the convention was basically this. Seward failed to get the nomination on the first couple of ballots because so many people thought that he was too radical. Higher law. He had once said that Civil War was basically an irrepressible conflict. It was going to happen. And everybody thought that we didn't want to go there. So next up came a guy by the name, that Salmon Chase guy. But Salmon Chase had managed to upset his own constituency. He had been a Republican, but the state fell to the Democrats. And so he basically told the Democrats he'd be a Democrat if they kept him as a senator. And then when it shifted back to being Republican, he then said he was a Republican again. During the convention, at a pivotal moment, that group will shift its support to Abraham Lincoln. Okay?
The tables have turned.
when Ohio, one of the largest states in the Union at that time, shifts its support to Abraham Lincoln, other states started to follow. Okay? And basically what ends up happening is that Lincoln proved to be a stronger candidate because not only did he have fewer enemies, he had a lot of really good friends. And this guy who the only thing he had ever done before nationally was a congressman for one term. And that was the Republican nominee. And it turns out that he actually had a very good image because he was someone who was that guy. He actually was born in a log cabin. Okay? He actually had worked, okay, as a rail splitter. He actually had basically taught himself to read. He was the Cinderella story. Okay? Southerners believed that Lincoln would interfere with slavery where it already existed. They basically believed him to be an abolitionist. Now, Lincoln, at that point, was not an abolitionist, but he refused to say anything to quiet their fears. So in other words, people were saying, oh my God, Lincoln's an abolitionist, and Lincoln didn't immediately start issuing reports. No, I'm not. I deny it. He just let it, he let it just hang out there. Lincoln will win with less than 40% of the overall vote. He is not even on the ballot in 10 southern states. Okay? In 10 southern states, he got exactly 0. Okay? All right? Basically, he wins because he gets all but 3 of the electoral votes in the free states. New Jersey split its vote between him and Stephen Douglas. It was the multiple candidate race like we had in 1824 all over again, but this time, because Lincoln won in the right states, the states with big bastions of electoral votes, he wins the election. Okay, here's another way of looking at it. Everybody imagine that instead of Lincoln running against 3 other people, if he had run against one candidate by the name of Breckinridge Bell Stevens, and Breckinridge Bell Stevens got all the votes that Breckinridge Bell and Stevens had gotten, and Lincoln had only gotten the votes that Lincoln had gotten. In other words, Breckinridge Bell Stevens got over 60% of the vote. Lincoln still wins.
60% of the popular vote?
Of the popular vote.
Not the electoral.
Not the electoral vote, because Lincoln, hands down, wins the electoral vote. Even if you shift the popular vote from 3 candidates to 1, he loses a few of those votes. He loses New Jersey totally, but he still wins.
Is that similar to what happened
Most of the
when,
popular
yeah,
vote,
to Bush when
did Breckinridge, for
he
example,
won the
get 20%?
election?
In some of those states, but what really happened is that in the South he gets nothing. So that's one of the things that makes it seem overly dramatic here, because where he loses big. In those southern states, it's not like it was close or anything. It's 0. And I mean, whereas in the northern states, particularly the further north you got, he wins big time. Yeah.
Is it possible to, because with all these disputed territories and stuff, to gerrymander your way into a victory, by including certain populations and stuff?
Well, no, because territories did not vote in the election. You have to be a state to have electoral
But
votes.
with smaller scale stuff, with Kansas and Nebraska, did they ever did they
Kansas was not a state yet because it's a territory.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Yeah.
Do you think that Abraham Lincoln like planned having the Democrats split by like having Stephen Douglas come out with what he truly believes and then having him split into two different?
Is he that genius? I don't know if I'm not sure he's that genius, but that would be fairly genius. I think he just was rewarded by circumstance. And he certainly won the North. And that's the thing. That's what got the South so angry. Okay? Because basically he became president without their permission. For years and years and years, the South had had Southern presidents, or presidents that were dough faces. They controlled the presidency forever. Now all of a sudden this guy who does not get any of their votes is president. And that makes them mad. Okay? South Carolina is the first one to react. Okay?
And they were the
South
first
Carolina's
ones
like that.
to be mad.
Okay? South Carolina is the first to react. They passed what was known as the Declaration of the Causes of Secession. Yes, it was called that. Their argument was the North violated the Constitution by not properly enforcing the Fugitive Slave Clause.
So they're like, oh yeah,
So-
because the North was like,
Go out of their way.
Remember the personal liberty laws?
yeah.
States were passing personal liberty laws which overrode those the Fugitive Slave Act, and the federal government didn't hammer them. Okay? Yeah.
I could just be really confused, but didn't South Carolina like
Secession.
not like do something
Yes.
a while ago?
Yes.
Okay.
They were exactly that. They were the ones that refused to abide by the tariff and had tried to basically overturn the tariff through nullification. And so, yes. And that's why some people say that the actual cause of civil war is not slavery, it's the tariff. Okay. The other thing that South Carolina argues is that it has the right to secede via states' rights. And so, as a quick exercise, connect the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions with the South Carolina exposition, okay, with the Declaration of Causes of Secession. What's the glue? With states' rights. So right, what connects these things? Very quickly, just there's a perfectly awesome answer, but there's several intuitive answers that you can come up with. Okay? Right? So connect the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, the South Carolina exposition, and the Declaration of Causes of Secession. Okay? So has everybody kind of written something here? So write something. Write it. Still finishing the notes. Oh. What? Yeah. Well, that's why I'm asking this. That's exactly why I'm asking this. Okay.
What is this thing?
All right.
And Hamilton were like,
What
like
is
Virginia
this
and
thing
Kentucky
here?
resolutions, like, Madison,
Okay, right. Right.
were like compact. Right, like states' rights. Yeah, that was the first. Yeah.
Because he was like, I'm gonna do 4 things and I'm over
That was what John
He was like, we're gonna do these 4 things and I won't run it. And he did everything. He didn't run it. And he got sick. But he got sick. But I was like,
All right. So, who thinks they got this? Who thinks they got this? Who think? Oh, really? You make me cry. It's gonna make me cry.
I know not of this thing.
Okay, so,
This thing.
go ahead.
And states' rights can overrule the federal law.
Okay.
States form the union and therefore they can secede.
Yeah. Dude, so you don't remember what that was, what the thing is that you defined it, and that's perfect. Does anyone know what it was called? Yeah.
Okay, so Virginia and Kentucky resolutions were formed by James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. Oh wait, Jefferson.
Jefferson.
Yeah, Jefferson.
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson.
All right.
So they came up with compact theory, which is that the states individually are more powerful than the whole.
Mhm.
So America's individual states can check the constitutional legitimacy of laws,
Mhm.
and they can nullify
Mhm.
unconstitutional ones.
Right.
So,
don't think so.
they would like, oh no, we don't like the Alien Sedition Act.
Right.
So they just nullified it. And
Okay.
then that's what the South Carolina expedition did.
Okay.
That's what John C. Calhoun did
Yep.
with it.
Mhm.
And so they declared the Paris Agreement 2.8, 1832 null and void.
Right.
And that caused a nullification crisis.
Right.
And that was with South Carolina, which
Right.
preceded this.
Right.
And that's why people say that for the causes of war. But now, I guess South Carolina has that history of nullifying things, so they're saying that they're gonna nullify this election as a whole, maybe?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. Okay, Sam, you're good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, so the key word is compact theory. And it's whether or not the states or the whole is more important. And basically what South Carolina is saying here is that the whole did not follow the Constitution, so as via their state rights, via compact theory, they have the right to leave. Okay. All right. So just let me start this so I can pretend. So pretend I actually started chapter 14 today.
No.
Okay. Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Don't keep
Yes.
yourself as your kid.
Okay. Makes me feel so much better if I do. I can. What?
South Carolina is
Minute left.
It is.
Didn't want to be later.
It listened to a Smiths album right before it decided to
Seriously
succeed.
though.
Okay.
My favorite album is
What, you had to use a different color pen? Or you had to mark it with a Post-it? Got it.
I have you written down the kids.
I'm not.
But if South Carolina wouldn't succeed as a country, because,
Well, we'll see what happens next.
because they're a single crop.
That's
No, they're
They run away from home and they come back crying.
Yeah.
like,
Well, that's what we're gonna find out now, isn't it? That's what we're about to find out now, isn't it? Don't do it? No? Good? 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 Good?
Don't you dare.
Don't I dare?
Okay, you can do it now.
Don't I dare?
You can do it now.
Dare?
Dare.
You did it.
Okay. So, South Carolina's left. And several other states are basically now voting on leaving as well. And so, the senator from Kentucky, oh, not that one, he's dead. Okay. But the guy who actually took over for Henry Clay in the United States Senate. Okay, so apparently when you sit down on on Henry Clay's seat, you go, oh, I must find a compromise. Okay. So the guy who took over for Henry Clay in the Senate was Senator James Crittenden. Yes, I don't know why that is pronounced Crittenden, but it is.
what is it pronounced?
Crittenden. I know, okay.
Pretended.
So,
Yeah.
Amendment?
Amendment.
I was changing my tense and I didn't fix it properly. Okay. The compromise that he proposes starts off with what was the original 13th Amendment. Okay, awkwardly. This is the original 13th Amendment. The original 13th Amendment was to amend the Constitution to protect slavery where it already existed. Okay? It does not pass. So it does not become the 13th Amendment, and hence the one that bans slavery becomes the 13th Amendment. Okay?
That's awkward.
All right? Isn't that awkward? Okay. Anyway. The other part of this compromise was basically to go back to the line drawing thing. They would basically draw a line, okay, all the way to California, and we would prohibit nationally slavery in any territories north of 3630, and below it, all territories could choose. This compromise was being hammered out, not on the floors of Congress, but in a hotel across from the Capitol, because so many states had seceded that they needed the input of people from seceded states in order to basically create the deal. Once it is hammered out, it is shown to Abraham Lincoln. Now, Lincoln is not president yet. Lincoln is only the president-elect. But he says no. We actually have a handwritten note from Abraham Lincoln. It says, "Do not dally with pop sauve of any sort." Okay?
Is that verbatim?
Okay, that is verbatim. Do not dally with pop sauve of any sort.
What I say to that?
Okay?
What I say to that?
Yeah, like
When next we meet, we will talk.